Chapter 1. The Shattered Map. The rain fell like nails on the slate roof of the Drunken Griffon, an old coaching inn, hunched on the border of Talabheim clan like a beaten mutt. The hearth fire inside spat and crackled, failing to warm the gloom that clung to the inn's corners. Smoke coiled with the scent of sour ale and leather. Shadows swayed on the walls like specters. Katria Vorn sat in the farthest booth, her back to the wall, eyes scanning the room like a hawk watching a nest of snakes. Her breastplate bore the scratches of 100 battles, the right pauldron still smeared with dried blood. Her raven-black hair was tied back in a practical braid, revealing a face carved by hard choices, high cheekbones, a jaw like cut stone, and a nose that had been broken more than once. Her gaze was the cold steel of a commander who had buried more friends than she could count. Across from her sat a gaunt figure draped in a patchwork cloak. Fingers calloused and stained with ink. Nerves twitching like a man too long without sleep. He slid a roll of parchment across the table, sealed with black wax, bearing the broken hammer sigil of the City of the Damned. Katria broke the seal without a word. She unrolled the map slowly, flattening its corners with knife-calloused hands. The paper stank of mildew and rot. It was a cartograph of Mordheim, if one could call it that. The city had once been proud, a jewel of the empire. Now it was a splintered skeleton. Streets ended in yawning craters, entire quarters blacked out or scrawled over with the high Gothic symbol for tainted. Wyrdstone caches glittered on the parchment, in green ink like cancerous stars across a diseased sky. "You expect me to take this into the pit," she said, her voice like gravel dragged across steel. "The noble houses of Talabheim have their eyes on wyrdstone, Captain," the man whispered. "You fetch it, they pay. Gold. Favors. Enough to raise an army. Enough to forget your past." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't know a fucking thing about my past. I know you were court-martialed, that your regiment died screaming in the Drakewald while you came back alone. I know you've been leading sellswords ever since, burning bridges wherever your boots fall." The dagger she slammed into the table made several heads turn. Wood splintered, her lip curled. "I should slit you open and feed your guts to the dogs. But then you wouldn't know where the vaults are," he said, voice trembling but steady. "And you wouldn't know about the other parties already on their way, Tyleans, witch hunters, Skaven." Katria's silence was consent. By the time the iron howl rode out at dawn, the rain had turned the roads into black veins of sucking mire. The warband was 30 strong. Mercenaries, killers, thieves turned soldiers. Some wore chainmail scavenged from battlefield corpses, others breastplates too big for their frames, dented and daubed in crude paint. They were armed with swords, crossbows, halberds, and bad tempers. Katria rode at the front, atop a black warhorse named Vornacht. Her lieutenant, a red-haired brute named Helmut Kranz, rode beside her, cradling a blunderbuss across his saddle. "Mordheim," Helmut spat into the mud. "You sure about this, boss?" "No," she replied, eyes on the horizon. "But gold doesn't fetch itself." The road became a grave trail the deeper they went. Crows perched on waystones carved with warning runes, gnawed bones half buried in the muck. A fog settled in like the breath of some colossal corpse, thick and choking. The sound of hoofbeats was muffled, distant, swallowed by the land. They passed a ruined chapel half swallowed by swamp. Skulls lined the path like offerings. From within something moved, just a shadow, then gone. No one spoke. They made camp in the husk of a watchtower by nightfall. Fires were kept low, the soldiers ate salted pork and hard bread, eyes flicking toward the dark. Countries stood apart, watching the stars what few could be seen. She fingered the map again, eyes tracing a path toward the merchant quarter, one of the largest wyrdstone deposits marked. "Moss," said Helmut, joining her. "Why us?" "Because no one else is stupid or desperate enough," she muttered. "Because when the gods curse a place, Men like us are the first to dig in the dirt for the bones." He chuckled, hollow. "I heard wyrdstone melts your eyes from the inside out, turns you into a monster." Katria's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Them won't just have to be worse monsters." From the distance, a sound echoed through the forest, wet, unnatural, like stone cracking beneath a river. The men tensed, blades half-drawn. Something was watching them. Katria sheathed her sword, cold fire in her veins. Mordheim awaited, and it would learn to bite at the shrew. Chapter 2. The Rival Blades. The walls of Mordheim rose like the jagged ribs of a corpse long picked clean, broken stone and twisted metal clawing at the sky. What was once a proud imperial city now sprawled in ruin, half buried under collapsed cathedrals and split towers, its streets clogged with debris, charred wood, and the bones of the damned. Crows wheeled above the blackened spires, and a greenish haze shimmered over the skyline like the breath of pestilence itself. Katria Vorn rode to the crest of a crumbling hill, her horse Vornak snorting at the stench drifting on the wind, smoke, ash, and something fouler still. She raised her gauntleted hand, signaling the iron howl to halt. 30 rough warriors paused behind her, silent but watchful. Below, past a dead orchard of skeletal trees, lay the fractured eastern gate of Mordheim. A banner fluttered just inside the ruin, gold silk embroidered with a red sunburst and curved saber. Katria's jaw tightened. "The blazing suns." "Helmet," she growled. The red-haired lieutenant spat. "Figures that bastard would be here first." A cavalcade emerged from the gate ruins with theatrical flair. The Tylons rode caparisoned horses draped in embroidered cloth, their armor gleaming with polished brass and silk sashes. They looked like a troop of parade knights, until you noticed the blood-crusted blades and the dead eyes of hardened killers. At their head rode Luca Belanzo, as flamboyant as he was lethal. His cuirass gleamed gold in the wan light, and his crimson-plumed hat sat at a rakish angle atop his shoulder-length curls. He carried a thin rapier at his hip, and a brace of pistols slung across his chest like a bandolier of promises he fully intended to break. When he saw Katria, he broke into a fox's grin and swept into a mock bow from the saddle. "La mia feroce gattina," he called, his voice smooth and laced with venom. "The Shrew of Talabheim returns to the dance. Still leading your pack of mongrels, I see." Katria rode down the slope without dismounting. Her warhorse's hooves crunched bone and gravel. She stopped mere feet from him, sword still sheathed, but hand resting on the hilt. "Still playing at nobility with whores and cutthroats, Belanzano," she said. "I thought you'd have bled out in a gutter by now." "Ah, but you wound me. You forget us Tylons, we bleed only when it's dramatic." He winked, and always with style. Behind him, his men fanned out, a semicircle of spears and crossbows. The iron howl responded in kind, forming a tense crescent behind Katrina. Fingers twitched. Knuckles whitened. One wrong word, and steel would sing. "We're not here for duels and peacock games," Katria said, eyes locked on Lucas. "I'm after wyrdstone." "I know you are too." Lucas' smile thinned. "Indeed. And yet, how tragic it would be to spill each other's entrails before we get the chance to steal from hell itself." Katria nodded slowly. "A temporary truce. We share what we find. You don't cross me. I don't kill you." Luca dismounted with a dancer's grace, drawing a dagger not in threat but to slice his palm. Blood welled red and rich. He offered the hilt. "The old way," he said. "A pact of blades." Katria's mouth curled in disgust, but she drew her own dagger and mirrored the cut. They pressed palms, mixing blood, sealing the pact in the eyes of their watching warriors. "Don't betray me," she said under her breath, "and I'll cut your tongue out and feed it to your men." Luca's grin widened. "Ah, cara mia, I wouldn't have it any other way. That night, the warbands camped in the ruins outside the gate, a reluctant merger. Fires burned low under shattered archways, shadows dancing over pitted armor and wary eyes. The Iron Howl kept to themselves, sharing meat and blackroot, eyes constantly on the blazing suns. The Talaeans drank wine and told crude stories, the edge of violence always beneath their laughter. Helmut sat beside Katria as she cleaned her sword, the firelight casting glints across the blade. "Never thought I'd see you parley with him," he muttered. "I didn't," she said. "I made a time bomb." With a smile. "You trust him?" "I don't trust anyone." Her eyes flicked across the firelight, catching Luca speaking animatedly with one of his sergeants. "Especially not a man who kills for beauty." Helmut sniffed. "You think we'll survive this?" "No," she said quietly, sliding the sword back into its scabbard. "But we'll make sure the city remembers who bled first." As the wind howled through the ruins and the distant wail of something not human echoed across the city's corpse, the uneasy alliance of rival blades settled into the dark. Mordheim watched, and it hungered. Chapter 3. Ashes and Teeth. The gate to Mordheim loomed before them like the gaping maw of a dead god, its iron portcullis twisted into an open sneer, half crushed by the falling of the great comet decades before. Beyond lay the shattered corpse of the once great city, now a labyrinth of rot, dust, and the ever-present gleam of wyrdstone dust, green, shimmering motes that hung in the air like spores, glowing faintly in the pale daylight. Katria Vorn dismounted first, sword already unsheathed, its notched edge catching flecks of light like an old predator baring its teeth. She motioned for Helmut to fan the Iron Howl into a wedge formation. From behind, Luca, Belenzo, and the blazing sun strolled into the ruin like theater performers walking onto a cursed stage, their boots crunching over bone and black glass. "Doesn't look so bad," one of the Tailans muttered. A low groan rose from somewhere within the rubble ahead, deep and wet. "That's what they said before the siege of Kislev." Helmut grunted, then spat. The warbands advanced through the shattered avenue, what remained of Mordheim's eastern quarter. Whole buildings leaned like drunkards into the street, their foundations shattered. Wooden beams jutted out like broken limbs. Walls bore scrawls in blood and ichor, prayers, curses, sigils of the dark gods, some pulsing faintly as if breathing. Every step kicked up ash and fragments of wyrdstone no larger than fingernails. The men covered their mouths with cloth. Katria's skin prickled under her armor. The very air here watched. Then came the sound of movement, skittering and fast. From above. "Shields up!" Katria snapped, just as a thing dropped from a broken second-floor archway with a wet splatter. It had once been a man. Its torso was vaguely humanoid, but its arms were elongated, insectile claws, its mouth a vertical slit that snapped open to reveal rows of broken wet teeth. It shrieked, a high-pitched wail that reverberated through their bones. The creature lunged. Helmut's blunderbuss roared, the boom tearing through silence as pellets shredded the thing's head in a mist of black ichor and bone shards. Its body twitched violently before collapsing into a pile of glistening meat and chitin. "Scavengers," Luca hissed, drawing his rapier with a flourish. "They always come in packs." They came, pouring from broken windows and sewer grates like a tide of flesh and claws. A dozen of them, some crawling on all fours, others limping grotesquely on twisted limbs. One had an exposed ribcage where its heart pulsed with green wyrdstone embedded into the bone. Another screamed as it moved, its jaw split vertically up the skull, unhinging like a serpent's. Steel met flesh in a chaos of screams. The Iron Howl held firm. One of Katria's archers, a lad barely out of his teens, screamed as a scavenger tackled him, raking claws across his throat. Blood sprayed in a thick arc. Katria drove her blade through the creature's back with a grunt, twisting as it shrieked in her face, its blood hissing against her armor. Luca danced amid the fight, moving like wind through a storm, his rapier flashing. He stabbed one through the eye, kicked another backward into the rubble, and calmly shot a third between the legs before slitting its throat as it fell. But the scavengers didn't die easy. And lunged for Helmut, snapping with canine jaws. The red-haired lieutenant shoved a torch into its mouth, and it caught alight with a guttural choking scream. The stench of burnt hair and boiled blood filled the air. Then the ground trembled. Katria turned just as a building's second floor collapsed outward, timbers cracking, stones shattering. A cloud of dust and ash surged forward. She dove to cover, pulling a wounded howler behind a half-fallen pillar. When the cloud settled, the world had changed. From the gap emerged something worse. Possessed. There were 5 of them. Cultists once, now unrecognizable. One wore a mask of stitched flesh, its left arm replaced with a bony blade that shimmered with dark runes. Another dragged a pair of writhing chains that seemed to move of their own accord, slithering like serpents. The leader towered over the rest, a man fused to the remnants of ornate armor, his torso split open to reveal a snarling maw where his stomach should be. Black ichor dripped from it. "Form up," Catriel barked. The possessed moved with terrifying speed. A howler screamed as the chain-bearer yanked him off his feet, then dragged him screaming into the dark, bones snapping one by one until silence claimed him. Luca and Katria stood back to back. She slashed at the bladed cultist's arm, but her sword glanced off, only for Luca to whip a dagger into its throat from behind. "We fight well together, Gatina," he breathed. "Keep talking and I'll gut you with your own spine." The leader charged, a howling blur of muscle and mutation. It plowed through 2 mercenaries like bowling pins, the stomach maw snapping and biting, tearing off a man's face in one savage chomp. Blood sprayed across the ruins. Katria met it head-on, parrying a swipe from its clawed hand and plunging her sword into its gut, only to feel it sink into the stomach maw's fleshy interior. The mouth bit down. She screamed, yanked her blade free just as it began to twist. Blood poured from a dozen teeth marks in the blade. The thing roared in triumph, until Helmut leapt from behind and drove a halberd through the back of its skull with a thunderous crack. It spasmed violently, then fell, twitching. The rest broke. The cultists hissed and retreated, slinking into the ruins like cockroaches. Silence returned. Only the moans of the dying remained. Katria wiped her blade, breath ragged. She surveyed the carnage, 6 dead, more wounded. She looked at Luca, who leaned on his sword, face grim but still alive. Their eyes met. "No more games," she said. "No more poetry," he replied. And so, bloodied and wary, the alliance held. Finale. Chapter 4. Wide Echoes. The deeper they ventured into Mordheim's entrails, the heavier the silence became, oppressive and unnatural, like the city itself was holding its breath. Wind no longer moved, no birds cried. Only the crunch of boots on broken stone and the occasional groan of the wind through collapsed bell towers accompanied them. They passed through the shattered remnants of the Merchant's Square, now a jagged clearing littered with overturned carts and desiccated corpses. Stone facades loomed like silent sentinels, their windows dark as eye sockets in skulls. Faint trails of wyrdstone dust glimmered in the cracks, dangerously beautiful. Then they saw it. It rose from the square's heart, half swallowed by rubble and ash, a statue, impossibly intact compared to the rest of the ruin. It was massive, 12 feet tall, sculpted from obsidian, blackened with veins of green. The figure was cloaked, faceless, arms outstretched in benediction. Embedded in its chest like a stolen heart glowed a shard of wyrdstone the size of a man's forearm. Katria halted the group, her breath caught despite herself. The shard pulsed. Lucas stepped forward, tilting his head like a curious child. "It's alive." "Don't touch it," Katria warned, voice low. Too late. A young mercenary from the howl, Tomas, wide-eyed and eager to prove himself, stepped forward. The green light danced in his irises. Before anyone could stop him, he reached out and pressed his palm to the wyrdstone. The statue screamed. It wasn't a sound of air and throat. It was psychic, a psychic laceration that tore through the mind like molten glass. Every warrior dropped to their knees, hands to their heads as a tidal wave of pain washed over them. Katria's visions shattered, replaced by visions not her own. She stood on a burning street. The sky above cracked and bleeding. Wyrdstone fell like hail. Children screamed, their skin bubbling. Men turned into beasts mid-step. Sigmar's temple split in half, and something slithered out of it with too many eyes and not enough skin. She was drowning in a sea of green. Voices whispering in languages not meant for man. Eat the stone. Become the truth. Serve the cycle. Serve the maw. Then, blackness. She awoke, coughing blood, sprawled beside a shattered column. Half the warband was unconscious. Tomas lay twitching on the ground, eyes rolled back into his skull. His veins glowed faintly beneath his skin, like they pulsed with emerald fire. "What in the name of Moror was that?" Luca groaned, cradling his head, blood trickling from his nose. "Even," Katria hissed, stumbling to her feet. Or a warning. Maybe both. Helmut knelt beside Thomas. "He's burning up." "Cut the shard out," one of Luca's men suggested. Katria snarled. "No one touches it again." They dragged Tomas to a more secure ruin and made camp there as dusk fell. The city's lightless horizon stared back at them like a pit waiting to swallow everything. That night, Tomas began to change. It began with his fingers. Helmut was the first to notice, checking the lad's fever. His fingertips had split, flesh peeling away to reveal calcified claws beneath, black and ridged. His jawline was longer, the teeth too sharp. A second set of eyelids blinked sideways over his irises. Katria stood over him, arms crossed. "Bilbois mutating," said Luca. "It's the wyrdstone. It's inside him." "Who's a good fighter?" Helmut said quietly. "He's not a fighter anymore," spat one of the blazing suns. "He's a damn thing. You know what happens when the corruption takes root. Better to cut him loose now." "No," Katrina said. "'Tis sentimental, Captain," Luca teased, though his hand hovered near his blade. "Maybe," she said. "But we don't kill our own while they still breathe like men, not until they stop." As if in answer, Tomas coughed violently, and something black and writhing slid out of his mouth, like a leech veined with green. Everyone recoiled. Swords sang from scabbards. Helmut raised his blunderbuss instinctively. Tomas moaned. "Captain." He looked at her. His eyes were still his. Wide. Scared. Human. But his body betrayed him. Muscles spasmed. His spine twisted audibly. Bones cracked, elongating, reshaping. The green glow spread down his limbs. He wasn't going to survive the night. The camp divided. Katria stood guard beside Tomas, sword unsheathed, staring into the fire. Across the flames, Luca paced with feline grace, arguing with his lieutenants. The Iron Howl muttered amongst themselves. Fear brewed with every hour. At dawn, they heard the scream. Katria ran to the tent. Tomas was gone. Only shredded blankets remained, and claw marks dug deep into the floor. A trail of black ichor led into the ruins. Helmut stared after it. "Should we hunt him?" Katria's expression was stone. "No," she said. "We bury him in our memory and never speak his name again." Luca stepped beside her. "This city doesn't just kill us, it changes us." Katria's knuckles whitened on her hilt. "Then we don't let it. We kill it first." Behind them, the wyrdstone still pulsed in the statue's chest, casting long, green shadows over the crumbling stone. The city watched, and it remembered. Chapter 5. The Sisters Beneath. The descent into Mordheim's underbelly began with the stench, thick and sour, a fetid cocktail of rot, mold, and ancient excrement that clawed its way up the throat like a curse. The sewer gate they pried open groaned like a dying beast. Cold, damp air surged out in a wave so heavy with decay that several mercenaries gagged on reflex. Katria was the first to step in. Torchlight flickered along slime-slicked walls as the iron howl and the blazing suns crept into the sewers, their footfalls muffled on the muck-slick stone. The passage narrowed into a tunnel arched in brickwork green with age, weeping with condensation. Strange glyphs, worn, scrawled in dried blood or ichor, decorated the walls, remnants of mad prayers and forbidden rites long since swallowed by the dark. Their objective was a wyrdstone vault marked crudely on an ancient map they'd looted from a dying cultist 2 nights prior, a vault blessed by the divine and buried beneath the bones of Mordheim, where the comet's shards had sunk deepest into the earth. And, as they would soon discover, not all secrets lay unguarded. A clang split the silence. Steel rasped behind them. From every side passage, armored shapes emerged from shadow, shrouded in gray robes bound in chains, steel masks hiding faces and grim intention behind holy wrath. Their armor was scavenged but meticulously maintained, embossed with hammers of Sigmar and devotional script etched into the steel itself. Each held a weapon, warhammers, maces, flails, gripped with fanatical purpose. "Sisters," someone whispered, almost reverently. Then louder, with dread. "Sisters of Sigmar. Dozens of them." Katria raised a clenched fist. "Halt!" Her voice was calm, but iron. "Weapons down. Hold." One sister stepped forward. Her helm was more ornate, a grim crown of spikes rising from the brow. In one hand she held a blackened warhammer, crusted with old gore. Her voice rang out like a church bell at a funeral. "You tread on sanctified ground. This path is forbidden." Luca stepped up beside Katrina, smiling with sharp teeth. "We're not here to blaspheme, Sorella, only to pass. Surely Sigmar's daughters wouldn't strike down allies of the Empire." "No allies enter uninvited," the lead sister replied. "The vault below is not for profit. It holds corruption we vowed to bury beneath prayer and stone. Men like you are drawn to it like carrion to plague." Helmut shifted uneasily. Several howlers gripped weapons tighter. One of the Talaeans muttered a curse in his native tongue. Tension snapped like drawn bowstrings. The lead sister took a step forward. "Your greed has no place here. Turn back or drown in your own heresy." Then Katria spoke, cutting through the air like a blade. "We found the shrine of the nameless saint," she said, pulling a scroll from her belt. She unrolled it, revealing a charcoal rubbing of the wyrdstone shard embedded in the statue's chest. "It's waking. Something beneath Mordheim stirs. Your prayers aren't holding it back anymore." The sister stared, unmoved. "Lies. Heresy wrapped in desperation." "Then let us pass," Katria said, stepping forward unflinching, "and you'll see it with your own eyes. If we're wrong, kill us. If we're right, then you'll need us, because no faith alone can stop what's coming." The sister was silent for a long moment. Then she raised a gauntleted hand. 2 sisters stepped forward and took the scroll. Another moved to Katria, eyes narrowed beneath her helm. She pressed 2 fingers to Katria's forehead, smearing the grime there with ash from her gauntlet. You walk the narrow path, Shrew of Talabheim, she said. You'll pass, but should your blade seek to steal from the vault, your bones will join the blessed dead in the catacombs. The sisters parted like stone guardians, moving with divine will. The warbands passed between them, step by wary step, every muscle tense, eyes never leaving the silent watchers who lined the tunnel walls. Not a word was spoken. Deeper they went, led by flickering torchlight and the sister gun that joined them. The passage twisted downward, stone stairs slick with slime, the walls narrowing like a throat. Murals flickered in the shadows, depictions of Sigmar's wrath and the fall of Mordheim, saints crowned in flames, daemons writhing in green fire. Then they reached the vault. Chamber shaped like a broken cathedral, its ceiling collapsed in jagged arcs above. Stone pillars ringed a central pit, from which wyrdstone pulsed, a shattered crater full of shards that gleamed like broken emeralds. The glow cast dancing, corrupted halos around them. Several sisters stood in silent prayer at the rim, unmoving, weapons planted like gravestones. Katria approached the edge, staring down. The wyrdstone pulsed in rhythm, like a heartbeat. Luca whistled low. Beautiful. Damnable. We'll never make it out whole, will we? No, Katria said. But we'll die rich, he smirked. She looked at the sisters in the dark, at the vault, at the weight of what stirred below. Then she whispered, or not die at all. Chapter 6. Scars and Songs. Night in Mordheim fell not like a curtain, but like a lid slamming shut on a coffin. The winds howled through hollowed-out ruins like the whispers of ghosts, and the stars, those brave few that dared pierce the miasma above, shimmered faintly through the green haze that blanketed the city like a death shroud. The warbands had found relative shelter inside a partially collapsed guild hall, its stone walls mostly intact and its vaulted ceiling only slightly cracked. The shattered remains of frescoes depicting merchant kings and Sigmarite saints peered out from the grime like silent judges. A fire crackled in the center of the chamber, spitting embers that drifted up into the dusty rafters. They sat around it, Petri and the remnants of the Iron Howl, Luca Belanzov with his peacocking Tylens. Most nursed wounds, bandaged limbs, bruised faces, torn armor. Wine passed hands, so did sour meat. Blood still stained their blades, not all of it dry. Katria leaned against a support column, her breastplate off, chain-mail tunic stained from shoulder to waist. Her left arm was wrapped in fresh linen, where something, no one was sure what, had bitten her. She watched the flames, but her eyes weren't on the fire. Across from her, Luca lounged like a cat among dogs, his coat off, arms bare. His rapier lay across his knees, and his long fingers traced the edge with idle reverence. The conversation had grown muted, then came the inevitable crack of tension. You hesitated back there, Luca said, not even looking up. When the scavenger leapt for your archer. Katria's gaze shifted to him slowly, her voice dry as dust. He died anyway. My blade was busy keeping Helmut's throat intact. The boy was loyal, and loyalty doesn't stop teeth from tearing your spine out. The silence following was thick, but Luca pressed on with a smirk. Sometimes I wonder if you feel anything, Katina. Only recoil, she muttered, when I squeeze the trigger. Luca chuckled, then drank from his flask. Such poetry. Did the Empire teach you that, or was it the Drakewald massacre? Her hand twitched toward the knife at her belt. You want to go there? She asked, low, dangerous. He shrugged, eyes gleaming. I want to understand the shrew behind the blade. What makes Katria Vorn so frigid? She stood, crossed the space between them in 3 strides, and grabbed him by the collar, yanking him to his feet. Their faces were inches apart. "Don't help him. Does it bring back the screaming?" She slammed him against the wall. A blade was suddenly at his throat. His breath caught, but he didn't flinch, didn't blink. The fire hissed behind them. No one moved. Katria's lips were tight, trembling not with weakness but fury. Old, buried, raw. "They sent us in," she said, her voice a brittle thing. "To hold the line against things we didn't understand. We were just a buffer, meat shields for some noble bastard's retreat. My commander panicked. He gave the order to hold the position. We held it until the trees screamed back." Her eyes glazed over, not vacant, but distant. "I watched a man melt in his armor, watched my second split down the middle by something that didn't bleed. I survived because I crawled through a pit of corpses and played dead for 6 hours, breathing through a throat full of ash." Luca was silent. She stepped back. "I've felt enough," she said. "More than you ever will." Luca looked at her for a long time, and for once the smirk slipped from his face. He sat again, slower this time. "My brother died here," he said softly. The accent thickened, the bravado stripped from his tone like old paint. "Antonio." He was foolish, brave, too honest. Thought Mordheim was a chance to redeem the Belanzo name. A noble mission. Katria didn't respond. She listened. "It led the first wave in the early years, before people knew what Wyrdstone really did. We received 1 letter. Then nothing. The Empire stopped sending men, and my brother stopped sending breath." He looked into the fire. "I came here for gold, but I stayed for his bones." The firelight danced across their faces, her scars and his shadows. They sat in silence, not as enemies, not yet as friends, but as survivors who understood what it meant to bleed and keep walking. From a corner of the room, a howler began humming a low tune, a dirge. A soldier's lullaby passed through the camps of a dozen wars. Others joined in, some off-key, others silent with eyes shut. Katria closed hers and leaned back against the stone. Her sword rested across her lap, hand still on the hilt. Luca stared into the flames until his eyes reflected nothing but green. Chapter 7. The Carnival Dead. At first the music was faint, barely more than a flutter on the edge of the wind. A chiming tinkle, warped by distance and time like the fractured memory of a lullaby played on a rusted music box. The warbands paused on the cracked avenue that led through a ruined district of Mordheim's northern quarter, wary eyes sweeping the fog-choked ruins. "Oh, what in Sigmar's name is that?" Helmut murmured, his brow furrowed beneath a dented helmet slick with sweat and grime. Katria didn't answer. Her hand rested on the hilt of her longsword, knuckles white. The air had grown colder. Not the damp chill of the Mordheim night, but a deeper, piercing cold that slid under armor and into the marrow. They moved cautiously forward. The fog parted as they turned a corner, and the warbands beheld it, a long-abandoned carnival ground, nestled in the hollow of a collapsed amphitheater. Colorless streamers fluttered limply from splintered poles. Broken wagons lay scattered like forgotten toys. The skeletal remains of a carousel jutted from the center, its horses twisted into unnatural shapes, some with too many eyes, others with mouths agape in silent screams. The music emanated from a crooked bandstand, its instruments moving without players, strings strumming, drums beating with no hands. The tune caught on a loop that never finished. A large tent, striped red and white though the colors were faded and bloodstained, loomed at the far end. Katria halted the group at the edge of the square. "This wasn't on the map." "That was not the pen," Luca said softly. face pale. This is necromantic residue, places that exist because the dead remember them. The shadows shifted. From behind the carousel, they emerged. Jesters. The first one shambled forward on all fours, its bell-tipped cap fused to the skull, its face peeled into a rictus grin stretched with wire. Another pranced after it, limbs too long, flesh rotting in ribbons, juggling severed heads with eyeless sockets. A third skated into view on bone-crafted stilts, giggling from a mouth that split across its entire neck. Dozens. A grotesque parade of the dead, dressed in faded motley, eyes burning with green fire. Then, the music stopped. The silence was deafening. The jesters screamed. They attacked in a tide of claws and snapping jaws, flailing arms tipped with razored bells, broken fingers and jagged bone. The undead fell upon the mercenaries with mindless glee. "Shields, oh!" Katria bellowed. "Break ranks and die!" The iron howl formed a tight wedge, blades flashing. Helmut stood at Katria's side, his halberd slicing down a jester mid-leap, cleaving it clean in two, only for the legs to crawl on and wrap around a soldier's throat. One of the jesters clamped its jaw onto a man's face, peeling his skin from the bone like an orange rind. Screams rang out, blood sprayed. Luca danced through the chaos, twin sabers spinning in a whirlwind of death. "Behind you!" he shouted as one of the stilts walkers lunged at Katria. She turned in time, driving her sword upward through its gut. The creature screeched, vomited a cloud of green mist, and exploded into twitching limbs. The battle became a whirl of madness. The dead did not tire. They laughed as they died, voices like shattered flutes. Their bones cracked like cymbals, their blood hissed against steel. Helmut was the first to fall. Katria saw it. He had strayed, just beyond the formation, trying to save a downed recruit. A jester clad in rotted silk sprang from a wagon above, landing on Helmut's back. The claws pierced deep. He roared in pain, slamming the creature against a stone pillar. But another jester leapt on him, then a third. He vanished under a mass of rags and rotted flesh. Katria fought her way through bodies, screaming his name, her blade a blur of fury. She reached him too late. Helmut's throat had been ripped out. His eyes, once sharp and cunning, stared up at nothing. The jesters had painted his face with his own blood, twisted into a clownish grin. Katria let out a guttural cry and decapitated all three attackers in a storm of blade and spit. The warbands rallied around her rage. Tailans and howlers alike fought with brutal unity. The jesters were driven back, burned, beheaded, broken. When the last of the dead fell, its neck snapped beneath Luca's boot and saber. The music began again. Soft, slow, idedusen. No one spoke. No one moved. They burned the bodies. Katria knelt beside Helmut, placing her bloodied hand on his chest. "He followed orders," she whispered. "He didn't break ranks." Luca stood beside her, solemn. Felt these people who lived in ultimately. Died saving a man already dead, Katria said. That's the kind of man he was. She stared into the flames as the makeshift pyre rose into the poisoned sky. He was the last one who knew me before I became this. Luca placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. The Carnival still loomed in the fog behind them, empty now, but echoing with laughter. They left it smoldering behind them. Chapter 8. Broken Faith. The shrine was not marked on any map. It stood hidden within the bones of Mordheim's western ruins, buried beneath a crumbled tenement, accessible only through a staircase veiled behind a wall of debris. It had once been a proud sanctum of Sigmar. Carved pillars, now cracked and draped in moss, held up a vaulted ceiling above a dais bearing a hammer-shaped altar. Candles, long cold, stood like sentinels in black iron sconces. Dust coated the floor in thick layers, broken only by footprints too fresh to belong to the dead. And in the center of the sanctum, encased in a shattered reliquary of gold and sigmarite, glowed a cluster of wyrdstone. 5 jagged shards, vibrant, pulsing, whispering. It was Lukai who found it. "Praise be to blind fortune," he murmured, eyes shining. "We could retire on this." Katria didn't respond. She stared at the altar, the rune of Sigmar carved deep and proud into its face, now cracked by the very impact of the wyrdstone's fall. The holy site had become a wellspring of corruption, faith twisted into fuel for the damned. "Grab it," she ordered at last, her voice like rust on steel. "Fast." The warbands moved like wolves, sacks pulled open, hands wrapped in cloth, eyes wary. Wyrdstone did not forgive the careless. The air buzzed with the stone's unnatural energy. One mercenary screamed when a shard burned through his glove, searing flesh to bone. Katria remained still, eyes locked on the statue behind the altar, a depiction of Sigmar Heldenhammer, arm raised, hammer aloft. The face had been worn smooth by time, but the intent remained. Judgment. Fury. She felt it, the weight of her choice. And then came the sound of steel boots. Witch penters. The echo reverberated through the shrine's catacombs like thunder rolling through a crypt. Dozens of them in black leathers and chainmail, adorned with purity seals and burning eyes. Their leader strode ahead, a towering figure in a wide-brimmed hat and black greatcoat, his face gaunt and angular, beard like iron wire. He carried a long sword in one hand and a torch in the other. Captain Earwald Erased, he commanded, voice a whip-crack of holy wrath. "Drop the stones. Pray for mercy." The warbands froze. Tension coiled in the air like a snake poised to strike. "Now," Katria said. Luka turned to her, wide-eyed. "We're already damned," she growled, drawing her blade. "We can't walk back into the light, so we'll fight in the dark." Owell's eyes flared with hatred. "Then die in it." The shrine exploded into violence. Crossbow bolts whistled across the chamber. One howler took a shot to the throat, gurgling as he dropped to his knees, blood fountaining. Another fell as a hammer caved his skull inward, bone and brain splashing the altar. Katria fought with unrelenting ferocity. Her sword sang through the air, slicing tendon and cracking ribs. She parried a downward blow from a flanged mace and drove her boot into the attacker's knee, snapping it backward with a wet crunch. Her riposte punched through his gut. Luka spun like a crimson whirlwind, twin sabers flickering in the candlelight, each strike lethal and precise. But the witch hunters were trained killers, driven by faith, unrelenting in purpose. They were losing ground. "We have to fall back," Luka shouted. "Into the catacombs." Katria snarled, slashing down another zealot, his blood painting the shrine floor. The warbands broke formation, fleeing down a side passage flanked by collapsed tombs and sacrificial alcoves. Torchlight danced along the walls, casting long shadows. The screams of the dying echoed behind them, human and inhuman. The hunters followed, tireless. Through the twisting bones of the earth, Katria led them, ducking collapsing beams, leaping chasms, wading through ankle-deep sewage where the stone gave way to the old undercity. The catacombs grew darker, more ancient, their walls carved with forgotten runes and mad scribblings. Rats the size of dogs scattered before them, some half-hairless, their eyes glowing faintly. Katria's breath came ragged. Her arms ached. Blood ran from a slash on her thigh where a blessed dagger had grazed her. She leaned against the wall, the torch shaking in her hand. "This isn't war," she said aloud, voice hollow. Luka glanced at her, blood streaking his cheek. "What?" This, all of it. Her eyes glinted with something close to despair. It's desecration, greed, a fool's crusade wrapped in steel. Luca hesitated, his bravado faltering. You're having a crisis now? I watched men burn shrines today. I saw my friend's face torn off by dead jesters. We stole from gods, and now their hounds are hunting us. He didn't respond. She looked up at the ceiling where cracks revealed slivers of wyrdstone veined like tumors through the stone. I came here for coin, she whispered. But what if we're digging into something that should never be unearthed? Then we finish what we started, Luca said more softly this time, because stopping now won't undo any of it. Behind them, the witch hunters howled oaths of purity, and so they ran, through tunnels where sanity frayed, past bones that still wept, past murals of angels strangled by serpents, and Katria led them deeper, not toward salvation, but into the beating heart of the city's rot, because there was no redemption left. Survival. Chapter 9. Blighted Oaths. They met in the cracked amphitheater, a ruin split in half by the comet's fury, its jagged tiers overgrown with lichen and word-tainted mold that pulsed with a faint green glow. The air stank of musk, rot, and something acidic that stung the nostrils and clung to the tongue. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the broken ceiling above, casting elongated shadows over the stage, where death would soon take its final bow. The Skaven had arrived hours earlier, crawling from tunnels and fissures like vermin summoned by rot. They were dozens strong, filthy, hunched creatures in patchwork armor, their fur slick with filth, eyes gleaming like red coals in the dark. Each carried rusted blades, barbed hooks, or crackling warped devices that fizzed with green lightning. At their head stood a tall, gaunt specimen with a chain of wyrdstone shards looped around his neck, claws twitching in anticipation. His name was Vrech Spinatwitch, and his voice was a tangle of hisses and rasping glee. Katria and Luca stood on the other side, flanked by what was left of the iron howl and the blazing suns, faces pale, armor dented, weapons blood-worn. Behind them, sacks of wyrdstone bulged like the bellies of gluttons. Days of hard-earned scavenging, now up for negotiation. "This is madness," whispered Luca, eyeing the Skaven as they fidgeted, licked their teeth, and sniffed the air like dogs on the scent of blood. "You trust them?" "I trust that they hate us a little less than they love wyrdstone," Katria muttered. "And for now, that's good enough." Vrech stepped forward, twitching. "You give stone. Yes, we open tunnel path, safe clear through Dead City, much value, much reward, no trap. Katria narrowed her eyes. "We keep half. The rest you get when we're clear of the southern ruins." The Skaven snarled, chitted among themselves in their twitching, broken tongue. Vrech tilted his head, cracked his neck, and gave a theatrical bow. Yes, deal. And so the truce was made. They marched into the ruins as allies. The southern quarter was an open grave. The buildings were not merely ruined, they were melted, as if the comet's impact had not only shattered stone but unraveled it. Every surface dripped with mutant moss. Walls bulged as if breathing, and some twisted trees wept ichor instead of sap. The path the Skaven led them through was narrow and winding, a corridor of decay. The further they moved, the more it stank, burned copper, urine, blood. Skave flanked them now on all sides. Too close, too numerous. Katria felt it first. The eyes. The silence. No more idle chatter. No more twitching. She raised her fist. Halt. Vrech had vanished. "And push!" she screamed. It came all at once. Explosions rocked the corridor, green fire spewing from warp-laced devices. A mercenary was instantly vaporized, leaving behind only molten armor and a stain. The skeins surged forward with shrieks of glee, their blades already slick with anticipation. Katria swung her sword into a ratman's face, splitting it from skull to snout. Another dove at her, dragging a serrated blade across her ribs. She twisted, kicked its kneecap backward, and ran it through. Around her, chaos. Luca was dueling three at once, dancing amid the tide, sabers a blur. He beheaded one and disemboweled another in a single spin, but the third lunged onto his back, claws raking. A Talon cried out, stabbed through the spine. Another burst into flame from a warp bomb, screaming as his flesh boiled. And the wyrdstone? The sacks were gone. Snatched in the first volley by sneaky paws, dragged into sewer cracks and rubble holes like looted treasure. Green gleams vanished down burrows like stars swallowed by night. "Fall back," Katria bellowed, hacking another Skaven in half. "To the arch." They formed a ragged circle, bloodied, surrounded, the skein hissing, charging again. Helm cracked. Visions swimming, Katria plunged her blade into the earth beside her and pulled free her sidearm. One shot. She leveled it at the barrel-chested Skaven bearing a warp axe. Its skull detonated in a burst of blood and brain. They fled through the arch as the Skaven chased them, only halting as one of Luca's men hurled a satchel of black powder and torched the entrance. The explosion rocked the quarter, collapsing the passage. Silence returned, thick with smoke and the smell of scorched fur. They had survived. Barely. They regrouped in a gutted tower, panting, bleeding, armor hanging in pieces. Faces were blank, eyes hollow. "What now?" someone asked. "We have nothing." "Worse than nothing," Luca said bitterly. "They'll be hunting us now." Katria sat with her back against the wall, holding her blood-soaked side. She looked down at her hands. No wyrdstone, no gold, no allies. There's only death and betrayal. Her voice was ragged. "We go deeper." She looked up, fire in her eyes. "If Mordheim wants to break us, it'll have to try harder." But the morale was gone. They were no longer a warband. They were carrion, walking in a city that had already decided they belonged to it. Chapter 10. The Hollow King. They staggered into the manor grounds, beneath a sky that no longer resembled heaven, only a bruise across the heavens, choked with weird tainted fog and ash. The survivors, fewer than 20 now, limped through the shattered gates of what had once been a noble estate, its iron filigree twisted into skeletal spires, its coat of arms rusted and unrecognizable. Time had not merely worn this place down, it had gnawed it. A dead garden clawed at their boots, its hedgerows leafless. The statues toppled or cracked, some fused with strange fungal growths. A marble cherub wept black tar from hollow eye sockets. Moss blanketed the manor like a cancer, and the windows watched. Katria didn't trust it, but they had nowhere else to go. They pushed open the front doors with a groan that echoed like a scream in a cathedral. Inside, the air was still. No dust stirred, no rot reeked. Just silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Candles burned in sconces, fresh, unlit by mortal hand. "Something's wrong," Luca muttered. "This place is alive." The main hall stretched wide and yawning, draped in velvet so dark it swallowed light. Paintings lined the walls, portraits of nobles with high cheekbones and dead eyes. One of them, an aristocrat in crimson finery with a scepter of black bone, seemed to move as they passed. The air grew colder. Then came the voice. "You bleed well, warriors, and you reek of death and desperation. Come." It wasn't spoken aloud. It rang in their minds, each syllable oily, heavy, tasting of old blood. Katria drew steel, as did the rest, but the doors behind them slammed shut with a force that cracked the stone. Candles flared, and from the staircase above he descended. The Hollow King is tall, gaunt, but regal. His skin was translucent alabaster stretched over ancient bone, his eyes twin coals, sunken into a face carved from silence. His robes were tattered, noble silks that still glimmered faintly with ancient sorcery. No breath came from him, no heartbeat, but his presence pressed on the soul like a stone on the chest. He smiled. "Do not fear. You are guests, not prey." No one moved. He descended the final step and regarded them with a hunger that went far beyond flesh. "I am Lord Meltharion, last of House Drake. I once ruled this district with grace and blood. Now I rule its bones." He looked at Katria. "You bring wyrdstone sickness. It seeps from your veins." She stared him down, defiant. "We've lost everything. We're not here for you." "Huh?" he whispered, stepping closer. "But you are. You see, the stone calls to me, as it does to all cursed by time." He circled them, like a wolf sniffing wounded deer. "I offer you a gift," he said. "I know where great wyrdstone lies, unclaimed, untouched, enough to make your shattered dreams whole again, enough to rewrite your names in the tomes of history." Katria narrowed her eyes. "What's the price?" He turned to her slowly, the smile never leaving. "There is a man," he said. "A witch hunter, Errol Klaust. He bears the blood of the line that betrayed House Drake. He hunts wyrdstone, and he hunts me. You will bring him to me, alive. I will take back what time stole." Luca stepped forward, face pale. "You want us to hand over a man to be drained?" "No," Meltharion purred. "I want you to hand him over to be unmade." The silence was a living thing. Quitro clenched her fists. "He's hunting us too. He'll kill us on sight." "Then," the vampire whispered, "your paths are already entwined." He turned, ascending the stairs once more. "Refuse, and I will feast on your sorrow. Accept, and you will be richer than gods. Choose wisely, little blades." The candles dimmed, the manor darkened. The Hollow King vanished into shadow. Later, Katria sat alone in the manor's ruined library. Books fell apart on the shelves, and a raven, eyes stitched shut, perched silently on the sill. Luca entered, silent for once. "You're considering it," he said. She nodded. "Erwald wants us dead. The vampire just wants one man." "He's not a man. Not anymore. Neither are we." She didn't say it bitterly, just plainly, like stating the weather. "We need that wyrdstone," she said, "if we're to survive." Lucas stared at her for a long time. "There's a line, and once we cross it, we're not mercenaries, we're monsters." Katria rose, sword in hand. "Then let's hope we die before we become something worse." She walked out, and the manor laughed behind her. Chapter 11. Thorns and Steel. Dawn never truly came in Mordheim. The sky remained locked in a state of perpetual rot, ashen and green, like a bruise that refused to fade. The horizon pulsed with low-hanging fog, and from deep within the city's corpse something rumbled, distant, guttural, as if the earth itself was choking. But the warbands did not rest. The Hollow King had been true to his word. Beneath the manor's catacombs, in a vault sealed by bone and blood, lay enough wyrdstone to fund an empire's resurrection. Shards glistened in unnatural light, pulsing with promise and doom. The survivors harvested them with trembling hands, careful not to touch the stone directly, always glancing over their shoulders, because no one trusted anyone anymore. Katria stood over the crates, now sealed and bound in oilskin, watching as Luca tallied the count. His face was tight, controlled, too controlled. She knew the look. Something was boiling behind his eyes. "You kept some?" he said finally, not looking up. She didn't reply. Luca straightened. The entire warband, what was left of it, fell quiet. The crackle of the fire became deafening. "I said," he repeated, voice low and dangerous, "you kept some for yourself." Katria didn't move. "I kept enough to pay the price for survival." Lukas stepped forward. "That's not what we agreed. We share the take. Even split. This was the oath. You think the Skaven kept their oath? The sisters? The Hollow King?" Her voice was steel. "Oaths mean nothing in a place where the dead walk and the gods have turned their faces away." He pointed a gloved finger at her chest. "No, they mean everything. We only have our word, our honor. Strip that away and we're animals with knives." She leaned into his accusation. "We are mercenaries, Luca. We were never saints." "No," he growled, "but you're becoming a tyrant, and tyrants fall." With that, his rapier was in his hand, drawn in a blink, its edge catching the firelight like a fang. The warband scrambled back, forming a loose circle around them, some shouting, some pleading. Katria drew slower, with ceremony. Her sword, broader, heavier, slid free with a hiss, and the air between them thickened with bloodlust and memory. "You want this, Luca," she said, eyes narrowing. "You want to dance?" "I want the truth," he spat, "and I want to see if you bleed like the rest of us." They clashed. Steel sang. Luca moved like a serpent, fast, precise, every thrust a question, every parry a sneer. Katria was a storm, brute force, crushing counters, each blow meant to end the fight. The circle of onlookers stepped back as sparks flew and blood painted the stones where blades glanced flesh. Luca's saber bit her shoulder, shallow but sharp. She growled, pivoted, and slammed her hilt into his jaw. He staggered, spat blood, smiled. "You fight like you lead," he snarled. "Hard, but blind." She responded with a low sweep that nearly took his legs. He leapt, twisted in midair, and came down with a two-handed strike that she barely caught on her guard. The clash rang through the ruins like a tolling bell. They broke apart, chests heaving, blades red. "You out?" she said. "Not until your crown of stones breaks," he hissed. They came together again, fast and brutal. Luca ducked a swing, slashed across her ribs. She howled, fainted, then drove her boot into his gut, knocking him back against a column. He recovered, eyes wild, and lunged. This time, both struck. Her blade raked down his side, tearing cloth and drawing blood. His rapier drove into her thigh. They collapsed together, tangled in steel and hate. Panting, bleeding, still alive. Katria rolled off him, dragging herself upright with a grunt. Luca lay flat, one hand over his wound, breathing hard. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally she stood fully, limping slightly. "You think I betrayed you. Maybe I did. But you'd do the same if it meant your name would survive this cursed place." He didn't answer. He looked at the warband, half of them hers, the others his, all of them watching with narrowed eyes and uncertain loyalties. "Split the stone," she said. "Equal parts. We leave this city in silence, or we never leave at all." He turned, blade dripping, leg trembling, and walked away into the fog. Luca sat alone, bleeding into the earth. The warband did not cheer. The silence that followed was not peace. While countless, it was the sound of trust dying. Chapter 12. The Shrew Unleashed. The world blurred into pain. Katria's last memory before the darkness took her was the sickening crunch of a cudgel against her skull, a flash of red, the scream of a howler too far away to help, and the feel of her own blood trickling down her brow as she was dragged into the shadows of Mordheim's gut. She awoke bound in rusted chains, hanging by her wrists in a vault of stone in screaming silence. The chamber reeked of decay and incense. Strange symbols writhed on the walls, etched in blood, chalk, and something that shifted when she wasn't looking. Candles made of marrow sputtered green flames, illuminating the faces of her captors, chaos cultists, their forms hunched, swaddled in rags and bone armor, faces hidden behind stitched leather, and masks shaped like screaming mouths. Some bore limbs that twitched with unnatural rhythm and had no eyes, just gaping holes, weeping wyrdstone mist. They circled her, chanting in a language older than lies. The air was heavy, charged with invisible claws that scraped at the soul. She didn't speak, didn't beg. She watched. A figure stepped forward from the gloom, taller than the rest, draped in robes of flayed skin, a crown of bone on his head. His voice was the sound of rust devouring steel. Katria Vorn, the shrew, the broken blade, the queen of carrion, you walk the line of death, and yet fear life. She spat blood at his feet. He only smiled. Right. From a stone altar behind him, two acolytes produced a shard of wyrdstone the size of a man's heart, floating between clawed fingers, vibrating with barely contained madness. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat, green light piercing the chamber like a dagger of blight. "You will see," the priest rasped. "You will be stripped. We will feed your soul to the truth." The shard hovered toward her, and then it began. They pressed it to her chest, and everything broke. She was no longer in the chamber. She stood on a battlefield, but it was all the battlefields, all the deaths she had caused, all the screams she had heard. Hundreds of versions of herself fought in a great circle, clad in different armors, wielding different weapons, killing men, women, children, monsters. Each victory ended in fire. Each triumph tasted of ash. She turned and saw herself. Young Katria, the girl who had once dreamed of command, of honor, of empire, the girl with clean hands. That girl stared at her, eyes wide, lips trembling. "Why?" the girl asked. The question splintered her mind. She ran, through memories twisted into nightmares. The Drakkwald massacre played again, only this time it was her hand that gave the order to retreat, her sword that cut down the wounded, her voice that cried, "Abandon them!" Her mother's face, rotted. Her father, crucified on a tree made of bones. A parade of the dead, all people she had killed or failed. They danced around her in rings, laughing with broken jaws and hollow eyes. "You are already ours," whispered the wyrdstone. "You have always been ours," she screamed. Reality returned with fire. The ritual circle had exploded. The cultists screamed as green fire surged through the chamber, consuming them. Some burst like overripe fruit, painting the walls with bone and ichor. Others writhed in place, their flesh warping, becoming mouths, claws, voids. The stone altar cracked down the center. Katria stood. The chains that had bound her were gone, melted into slag. Her eyes blazed with green flame, her veins alight beneath her skin. Her blade, how it had gotten into her hand, was drenched in weird light, humming with impossible resonance. The cult priest raised his hand. "She is chosen," cleaved him in half with a scream. The cult died with violence and fire. She did not stop. She did not speak. She was a force unleashed. Steel rang through the vault. Limbs scattered, heads rolled. She moved like death incarnate, silent, efficient, unstoppable. The wyrdstone pulsed inside her. It did not consume her. It accepted her. When it was done, the chamber burned. The vault trembled, and she emerged from the ruins, not broken, not bleeding, but changed. Luca found her at dawn, standing amidst the smoke and ruin, blood-soaked and silent. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then what did they do to you? She turned to him, slowly. Amy showed me who I was. Her eyes gleamed. And now? I know who I must become. Chapter 13. The Red Spire. Mordheim's heart beat loudest in the Red Spire. It rose from the center of the city like a shattered fang, once the grand tower of Sigmar's high temple, now warped by wyrdstone and centuries of decay. Its upper half was shattered, burnt by the comet's wrath, leaving twisted stone jutting into the sky like the jagged teeth of some primordial beast. The tower bled green light from its cracks. The walls pulsed. The stone moaned when the wind passed through it. They came in waves. The mercenaries, battered and bloodstained, approached from the west, picking their way through shattered mausoleums and twisted statues of saints whose faces had melted into agony. Katria led them, her new presence an unsettling calm, her armor still scorched from the ritual fire, her blade humming softly with weird resonance. The others followed warily, not just because of what waited in the tower, but because of what she had become. From the sewers and hidden warrens came the Skaven, dozens of them, armored in patchwork iron, dragging strange devices that sparked with green lightning. Clan rats chittered, flanked by gutter runners on the walls, and at their center, Wretch Spinitwitch returned, bloated with stolen wyrdstone, his body distended with warp taint. One eye now a milky orb that twitched with sentience. From the east emerged the witch hunters, clad in scorched plate and black cloaks, haggard but unyielding. Captain Erwald Klaust rode at their head, pale and grim, one hand resting on the pommel of his silvered greatsword. His men bore torches and purity seals, eyes hollow from weeks of slaughter. They came not to claim the wyrdstone, but to end it. And from the ruins below crawled the cultists, survivors of 100 fallen covens. They wore armor sewn from skin, wielding blades made of bone and rust. Many were half-transformed, bodies warped by exposure, mouths where hands should be, eyes set in chests, screaming every time they breathed. All converged at once, drawn by the Red Spire's final trove, legendary caches of wyrdstone said to be so potent they could rewrite the body, mind, even time itself. The wind howled as they met. And then the silence shattered. The Skaven struck first, warp cannons belching arcs of green lightning that seared through cultist ranks, melting flesh and bone. One blast turned a man into a puddle of twitching, screaming meat. Another sheared through a column, bringing down a roof of jagged stone onto the heads of witch hunters. Blood sprayed in a rain of red mist. The cultists answered in madness. A champion clad in burning chains threw himself into the Skaven ranks, laughing even as the fire devoured his flesh. His chains exploded in a burst of warp fire, incinerating 6 rats and sending a dozen more screeching in flames. Erwald's men charged, banners raised high, voices raised in prayer. Crossbows fired into the fray, silver bolts skewering cultists through the eyes, the throat, the lungs. Then they hit the Skaven like a wall of judgment, and steel clashed with shrieks. Amid it all, Katria stood still, eyes fixed on the Red Spire's entrance. Her hand clenched at her sword. "Move," she ordered. The iron howled, and remaining suns followed, flanking the edges of the chaos. They didn't wade in, they cut through. Luca, face grim, danced between the lines, slashing down a rat, then a cultist, then parrying a torch-wielding zealot whose mouth had been sewn shut. A Skaven assassin dropped from a ruined buttress, daggers flashing. Katria didn't flinch. She turned and caught its neck on her blade, ripping the spine free in one fluid motion. The body fell twitching at her feet. Blood sprayed across her face. She didn't blink. The red spire loomed closer. But now they were noticed. Ratchet screeched. Kill the traitor, she thinks. They want take stone. He slammed a clawed hand onto a lever, and one of his abominations, a heaving monstrosity of stitched rat flesh and metal limbs, roared to life and thundered toward the mercenaries. It slammed into their line, crushing one of Luca's men beneath a piston paw. Bones exploded through armor. Another was flung into the spire's wall, body pulping on impact. Back, Luca shouted. Ni. Katria snarled, eyes locked on the beast. Forward! She sprinted. The abomination turned just in time for her to leap, blade igniting with green fire as it arced through the air. She drove it down into the creature's neck, the wyrdstone-laced steel cutting through bone like paper. The beast shuddered, roared, then exploded in a fountain of ichor and sizzling green flame. Smoke curled from Katria's armor. She did not fall. They reached the steps of the red spire. Behind them, the battle devolved into complete madness. Cultists detonating themselves in flares of blasphemous power, Skaven warp fire tearing holes in the stone, witch hunters drowning in blood. The sky wept black rain. The very ground cracked, wyrdstone veins throbbing underfoot like a heartbeat. Katria looked back once. She saw men she had fought beside cleaved in half. She saw faith and madness collide in a sea of blades and screams. She turned back to the spire. The door stood open. She stepped inside. Chapter 14. The Choice of Fire. The red spire bled green light. Within, time had fractured. The very air thrummed with unnatural rhythm, as if the tower's walls pulsed like lungs drawing breath from another realm. Each step Katria took echoed twice, once in reality, once somewhere else, a place made of whispers and madness. Behind her, the sounds of the battle had dimmed into distant echoes, metal shrieking, flesh torn, men and monsters screaming their last. The spire had swallowed it all, muting the slaughter as though it were merely background noise to something far more ancient and terrible. She ascended alone. The walls wept wyrdstone. Crystalline growths burst from the masonry, forming jagged sculptures like frozen screams. As she passed, they seemed to shimmer, some showing reflections, others possibilities. In one shard she saw herself, wearing a crown of bone, eyes blazing green, warbands kneeling at her feet. In another she was a beast, limbs gnarled and fused, her jaw unhinged as she howled to a sky on fire. She looked away. The stairs ended at a threshold of blackened bone, arcing into a chamber unlike any mortal place. It was round, impossibly so, its ceiling lost in darkness, its floor a swirling pool of light and void. In the center hovered the wyrdstone heart. It was not a shard. It was a core, the size of a man's torso, floating above a dais of warped iron and sacrificial gold. It pulsed with such radiant power that the chamber trembled with every beat. Every pulse sent out waves of raw, maddening need. It whispered in voices too numerous to count, too layered to untangle. We can make you whole. We can make you feared. We can make you free. Katria approached, her boots crunching over ash and cracked runes. The pressure built behind her eyes. Her skin itched as if something beneath was trying to crawl out. The wyrdstone saw her, recognized her. She stood before it, weapon slack in her hand, and the choice stared back at her. Take it. Become the vessel. The stone would empower her beyond mortality. She could rebuild, reshape, lead not a warband, but an empire. She would crush the cults, silence the Skaven, erase the witch hunters, rule the ruins with justice sharpened into vengeance. But the price was herself. She would be Katria no longer. Not truly. I'll destroy it. Banish the power, shatter the heart, and collapse the veins of wyrdstone that bled into Mordheim's root. It would end the cycle of damnation, end the city's allure. The monsters would scatter. The war bands would perish or escape. But her men would die. All of them. She stared into the light and saw them. Elmut, Babu smiting around a mug of ale, singing with a broken nose and bloody fists. Tomas, the young archer, dying, with her name on his lips. Luca, who still waited outside this tower, blade ready, heart torn. They trusted her. They followed her. They bled for her. She stepped back. No. She raised her sword. The heart pulsed violently, light flaring to blind, voices howling in a final scream. You are nothing. Her sword cleaved through the wyrdstone. The world broke open. Light detonated. Not an explosion, but a collapse, gravity screaming inward, a vortex of fire and shrieking magic. The spire quaked, stones falling like dying stars, the walls melting into fluid time. Katria was thrown backward, her armor seared, her body flung through the air. She hit the ground hard. Everything burned. The spire began to fall. It sighed. Luca turned at the roar. The top of the red spire erupted in green fire, pillars collapsing in a chain reaction. Skaven squealed and fled. Cultists screamed as the stone in their bodies ignited. Witch hunters fell to their knees, their prayers drowned by an unholy chorus of collapsing power. The wyrdstone veins cracked, split, and burned. The city groaned, and Katria emerged from the wreckage. Half her armor was slag. Her left arm hung limply at her side, twisted. Her face was pale, streaked with blood and ash. Her sword was gone, but her eyes were clear. Night was gone from them. The stone no longer whispered. Luca ran to her, helping her stand. What did you do? She looked back at the burning spire. 8 shows, and Mordheim, for the first time in an age, was silent. Chapter 15. The Taming. The city burned behind her. From the broken rim of Mordheim's southern wall, Katria Vorn stood silhouetted against the flames. The red spire had collapsed in full, its blackened bones now a graveyard of wyrdstone ash and melted relics. Fires spread like infection, lighting the sky with veins of orange and green. Buildings crumbled, their cursed architecture giving way to time, fire, and the absence of power. The wyrdstone veins had snapped like sinew under the cleaver of her decision. Iran. Now, Mordheim bled silence. Her armor was in ruins, charred steel clinging to a body cut and battered beyond mortal endurance. One gauntlet was missing. Her sword, the blade that had carried her through flame, blood, and betrayal, was a shattered remnant strapped across her back. Her face bore the truth, a single long scar running from temple to jaw, still seeping, traced by wyrdstone burn that refused to fade. She walked alone across cracked stone roads now littered with corpses. Most of the dead were unrecognizable, melted together by warp fire, devoured by mutation, or torn to pieces in the final clash. Some writhed still, begging for death. Some wept as their minds unraveled. She gave mercy where she could, but her stride never slowed. Only a few of the iron howl remained. Luca was among them, leaning against a broken pillar, cradling a bandaged side that leaked red with each breath. His coat had burned away in strips, and half his jaw was swollen purple, but his eyes still glittered when they saw her. "You came back." "I said I would," she replied. "And the wyrdstone?" She met his gaze. He stared at her, as if seeing someone both familiar and utterly alien. "You destroyed it." "Yes, in Lockhartachin." She paused, breathing the smoke and ruin-like air she had earned. "To remember who we were, so the next ones don't have to forget." Around them, other survivors emerged from the smoke like ghosts, Tylians with hollow eyes, mercenaries dragging wounded friends, a sister of Sigmar clutching a broken warhammer, weeping silently as she stared at the dead. The city had taken nearly everything. Helmut was gone, Tomas. Dozens of names etched into her mind like gravestones. But something else had been left behind. Katria stepped through the ruined gate. The world outside was bright in a way it hadn't been for weeks. Untainted sky, clouds drifting without the green haze. Birds chirped. Real birds, not carrion feeders or mutated screechers, just birds. She stopped. The others gathered behind her, unsure. She turned. "We leave now," she said. "Not because we've won, but because we've finished." "And what are we now?" Luca asked. And she looked him in the eye. "We are what's left, and what remains." She raised her broken sword high. "Not mercenaries, not scavengers. Survivors, witnesses, fire-forged." The remaining warband stared, bloodied, swaying. But they stood straighter. No cheers, no fanfare, just a silent understanding. They began the long walk eastward, away from Mordheim, away from the city that had tried to tame them all. Katria Vorn did not look back. She left the ruins, not as a warlord, not as a mercenary queen, and not as the Shrew of Talabheim. She left as a truth, a scar that walked, a soul burned to its last ember, but one that refused to dim. Mordheim had tried to tame her, but she had transformed it.